So Judge John Roach has put in a gag order where nobody associated with either side of this Karmelo Anthony case can speak. Not advocates, not friends, family, witnesses, anybody. Nobody can talk about the case.
Hear the shuffle of feet in the courtroom as the judge reads the plea agreement out loud. Gasps ripple through the gallery. When it's confirmed, the parents of Karmelo Anthony have pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence at the murder scene tied to the stabbing of 17-year-old Austin Metcalf. The courtroom, already tense, falls silent as the details are laid out. Prosecutors allege that in the hours after the fatal altercation at the Frisco ISD track meet, Anthony's parents interfered with key evidence connected to the crime. The guilty plea suggests they acknowledged removing or altering items investigators later recovered, evidence that could have helped reconstruct exactly how the stabbing unfolded. For the Metcalf family, the admission was devastating. Sitting only a few rows back, Austin's parents lowered their heads as the judge repeated the charge. His father clenched his fists, his voice breaking when he later told reporters, "It's bad enough we lost our son, but to know evidence was tampered with. That's another betrayal." The plea represents a turning point in the broader case. Until now, the focus had been almost entirely on Karmelo himself, who was indicted for murder earlier this year. But with his parents now admitting guilt, prosecutors say the pattern of obstruction paints a more disturbing picture, one of a family willing to blur the truth in the aftermath of tragedy. Reporters outside the courthouse wasted no time pushing the story live. Headlines blared across social media. Parents of accused teen plead guilty to evidence tampering in track meet murder. For a community still reeling from violence that unfolded in front of classmates and teachers, the news was another shockwave. And the question echoing now is simple. If Anthony's parents were willing to tamper with evidence, what does that mean for the full story of what really happened the night Austin Metcalf was killed? Parents admitted to. According to court filings, investigators believe the pair interfered with key physical items from the track meet stabbing, most notably a backpack containing clothing worn that night and a cell phone later seized by law enforcement. Prosecutors alleged that the parents attempted to wash bloodstains from fabric and delete data from the phone before detectives could execute a search warrant. The tampering didn't erase the evidence entirely. Forensic labs were able to recover much of the data and identify microscopic traces that pointed back to the scene, but the act itself showed intent to obstruct the investigation. The integrity of a crime scene is everything, the state's attorney told the judge. Their actions weren't just reckless, they were deliberate. Court documents also revealed that prosecutors had prepared to pursue harsher charges if the parents hadn't accepted the plea. By admitting guilt, they avoided the risk of a trial that could have exposed them to years in prison. Instead, sentencing will focus on fines, probation, and the possibility of limited confinement. Still, the plea cements their role in the case, not as bystanders, but as participants in covering up evidence tied to Austin Metcalf's death. For the Metcalf family, those details were gut-wrenching. The thought that anyone, let alone parents, would try to erase evidence from the night their son was killed deepened their grief. It feels like they tried to bury the truth along with Austin, one family member told reporters outside the courthouse. The admission also sends ripples into Karmelo Anthony's upcoming trial. Legal experts say the plea strengthens the prosecution's narrative, giving jurors a broader context, a family scrambling to control the aftermath, instead of allowing the truth to surface. And now the critical question emerges. With his own parents admitting guilt to tampering, how will jurors view Karmelo when his case is finally presented in court? For the Metcalf family, the guilty plea from Karmelo Anthony's parents wasn't just another legal step. It was a wound reopened in front of the entire community. Sitting together after court, Austin's father, Jeff Metcalf, described the admission as confirmation of something they had feared since the beginning. "We always believed there was more being hidden. Now we know," he told reporters, his voice breaking as he gripped his wife's hand. At vigils held later that week, supporters of the Metcalfs lit candles, not only in memory of Austin, but in protest of what they now call a betrayal of justice. Signs outside the courthouse read, "Let the truth speak," and "Tampering isn't love, it's obstruction." For Austin's classmates, who witnessed the chaos of that April night at Kendall Stadium, the revelation was especially hard to process. Teachers and students alike described feeling sickened that adults would try to interfere with the investigation of a teenager's death. The broader community response echoed the same outrage. On local forums and across social media, residents of Collin County questioned how far the Anthony family was willing to go to protect their son. One comment that spread widely said, "Parents are supposed to teach accountability, not cover up murder." Others demanded harsher consequences, arguing that probation or fines would be too lenient, given the seriousness of the crime. Still, some voices in the community expressed a complicated sympathy. A few pointed out the desperation parents might feel when facing the reality of their child's murder charge, even if their actions were unlawful. But for the Metcalf family, sympathy was the last thing on their minds. Their focus remains on justice for Austin, and the guilty plea only sharpened their determination to see the trial through. And now the community is left with a troubling reflection. If the parents themselves were willing to tamper with evidence, how many other truths about that night might still be hidden? While the guilty plea shook the community, it also forced both legal teams to recalibrate. For prosecutors, the parents' admission became a critical tool. In pretrial motions, they argued that the plea establishes a clear pattern of obstruction, suggesting the Anthony family wasn't just grieving, but actively working to shield Karmelo from accountability. This was not panic, this was intent, one filing stated, framing the tampering as part of a broader narrative the jury must hear. Prosecutors are expected to highlight the guilty plea during Karmelo's trial, linking the family's actions directly to the effort to muddy the facts of Austin Metcalf's killing. Legal analysts believe the strategy could be powerful. Jurors often look for patterns. One former prosecutor explained, if they see parents admitting to tampering, they may subconsciously connect that behavior to Karmelo himself. The defense, however, is already working to push back. Karmelo's attorneys argue that the parents acted independently, out of desperation, and that their choices should not taint the presumption of innocence owed to their son. In a brief statement outside the courthouse, one defense lawyer insisted, Karmelo Anthony did not ask his parents to act in this way. Their plea is not his burden to carry. Still, separating the parents' actions from Karmelo's case may prove difficult. Jurors will inevitably hear about the tampering, and prosecutors plan to argue that the attempt to alter evidence reveals a consciousness of guilt within the family unit. For the defense, the challenge is to frame the parents' behavior as misguided love, not as proof that their son committed murder. And that sets the stage for a pivotal question heading into trial. Will jurors accept the defense's argument that the parents' actions were separate, or will they see the guilty plea as part of a larger cover-up that extends directly to Karmelo Anthony himself? As news of the guilty plea spread, media coverage quickly reframed the entire case. What had once been a story centered on a high school track meet, stabbing now carried the added weight of a family caught tampering with evidence. Major outlets ran headlines emphasizing the parents' role, some calling it a stunning collapse of integrity, while others described it as a desperate act to shield their son. Television panels replayed clips of prosecutors explaining how evidence was altered or hidden, breaking down exactly how the tampering threatened to undermine the investigation. On talk shows, legal experts debated whether the parents' plea was simply damage control or proof of something darker. One commentator said bluntly, "When you plead guilty to obstructing a murder investigation, you don't just protect your child, you damage your credibility forever." Public opinion shifted rapidly. On social media, hashtags like Justice for Austin trended again, with users demanding that the court not only punish Karmelo if convicted, but also hold his parents fully accountable. Others argued the plea confirmed suspicions that the family had never been honest about the night Austin Metcalf was killed. A popular comment circulating online read, "Tampering with evidence isn't love, it's complicity." The saturation of media coverage also raised concerns among legal analysts about jury selection, with every headline framing the parents as guilty of obstruction. Finding impartial jurors who can separate their actions from Karmelo's case could prove difficult. This is the challenge of high-profile cases, one defense attorney explained. The courtroom is supposed to be insulated, but the narrative is already being written outside. For the Metcalf family, though, the media attention feels like a long overdue recognition of what they've endured. At least now the public sees more of the truth, Austin's father said. We can only hope the jury sees it too. And now the pressure builds. Will this constant media framing lock the Anthony family into a narrative of guilt before Karmelo even takes the stand? As the trial for Karmelo Anthony draws closer, attention is turning to what comes next for his parents. With their guilty pleas secured, the court will soon decide how they are punished for tampering with evidence in the wake of Austin Metcalf's killing. Legal observers say their sentencing could cast a long shadow over Karmelo's own case, either tightening the pressure on his defense or giving prosecutors even more leverage. Prosecutors are expected to use the parents' admissions as a narrative weapon, highlighting their role in altering or concealing critical evidence. This was not accidental. This was not grief clouding judgment. This was obstruction, one state filing noted. If sentencing results in prison time for the parents, experts say jurors may subconsciously see their punishment as an extension of the family's guilt, even if they avoid incarceration and receive probation or fines. The stigma of a felony conviction will still linger. For the defense, the strategy is clear. Isolate Karmelo's case from his parents. Attorneys have already hinted that they'll argue the parents acted out of panic, not under their son's instruction. But every headline about sentencing will remind jurors that those closest to him did wrongdoing tied directly to the investigation. Meanwhile, the Metcalf family is preparing themselves emotionally for another day in court. They've already endured the shock of losing Austin, the months of waiting for answers, and now the revelation that evidence was tampered with. Watching the parents of their son's accused killer face sentencing will only reopen wounds. Austin's mother described the process as layers of grief stacked on top of each other. The timeline also complicates matters. Depending on how sentencing unfolds, it could influence when and how Karmelo's own trial proceeds. Prosecutors may push to link the cases in the eyes of the jury, while the defense scrambles to draw a hard line between them. And that leaves one critical question hanging in the air. When the gavel finally falls on the parents' sentencing, will it serve as closure for the Metcalf family, or as a devastating preview of what awaits their son? The guilty pleas have done more than seal the parents' fate. They've reshaped the entire case. What began as a murder trial for an 18-year-old accused of stabbing Austin Metcalf has now widened into a story about a family's choices, their credibility, and their willingness to interfere in the justice process. For prosecutors, the narrative is clear. The Anthony family didn't just stand by their son, they crossed the line and actively tried to obstruct the truth. The parents' admissions give the state a powerful talking point, one they intend to highlight when Karmelo himself faces the jury. This family tampered with evidence, one prosecutor remarked after the plea. That speaks volumes about accountability. For the defense, the challenge has never been greater. No matter how forcefully they argue that Karmelo's trial should stand on its own, the shadow of his parents' actions will follow him into court. Jurors will be asked to weigh not just the facts of the stabbing, but the broader question of whether a family willing to erase evidence might also be capable of shielding the truth about that night. The Metcalf family, meanwhile, continues to grieve in public. At vigils and press gatherings, they speak less about legal strategies and more about their son's memory. But even in their sorrow, they know the guilty pleas mark an important step, proof that what they long suspected, tampering and obstruction, has now been acknowledged by the court. For the community, the case has become a cautionary tale. A moment of violence at a high school track meet has spiraled into years of legal battles, shattered trust, and revelations that extend beyond one teenager's actions. And so, as sentencing for the parents looms and Karmelo's trial approaches, one haunting question remains. Will justice for Austin Metcalf be defined by what happened on the field that April night, or by the choices made afterward to hide the truth?